Again, John Quinlan here with my co-host Wanda Smith, and now we are pleased to bring into the studio Toriana Pettaway.
Good morning.
Hey,
Thank
Tori.
you for
Welcome
having
so
me.
much. Is it okay to call you Tori?
Tori is fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
and I want to say my voice is a little raspy, and this weather's been harsh on me.
so far so good. We can get you. We can run for a bottle of water.
You want some water?
No, I have my coffee.
You doing okay? You got what you need? Just let us know. No, that's a peril of radio, especially
Right.
in the middle. The kind of week we've had. It's amazing. We
It's
all
been
don't have double
awful.
pneumonia. I mean, we've been yanked all back and forth. Actually, we were kidding Mo about this. But do you have any thoughts? Is there something that the Madison mayor can do about the weather?
This polar vortex has been very interesting. I have a heart murmur, and when you have a heart murmur, you first of all, you have an irregular heartbeat to start with, but
Sure.
particularly for me, inhaling anything below 70 degrees is hard. And it was awful for me because even in my house, I was struggling, when you have asthma.
Yeah.
And the environment, anything that happens in the environment is awful. So climate change, global warming is real, y'all. It's very much real.
I can empathize with that. I came back on Tuesday after being away in Chicago and Detroit, and I just wanted to get here before the polar vortex hit, but it was already so cold. I could barely make it up the steps.
So you can imagine what that's like with someone who struggles with a major health issue.
The reason why this actually might be a good transition into something, I think that is front and center about the reason why you've chosen to run. Each of the candidates that we're going to be talking to in this couple of days has a personal story,
Right.
things that motivate them. But I think what struck me most is I've heard you speak at some of the debates in and out in the community is that you struggled at a basic level. Wanda and I can both empathize
Right.
with this. I lost my house to an unjust foreclosure, a county program that failed me a few years ago, and I've lived in 6 places since then. I
my.
haven't always known where I'm going to land,
Right.
but I know that part of your story is an experience with housing challenge and homelessness. What is there about that motivates you to run for mayor now?
Let me tell you, homelessness is something that has been one of those things that, as I worked in the homeless community for half of my experience here in Madison, I never thought that would be my story.
Me too. I mean, I was a housing advocate for years. How
Yes,
could this happen to me?
and-
I knew what the system. So go ahead.
And, I'm very passionate about that because part of the reason why I worked in the homeless community is because I've lived abroad and I studied abroad and I've done missions work and I know the true definition of poverty. And I understand that in America, we have choices.
Yeah.
And I understand that poverty, even though people struggle in America, because I've done service work and missions work abroad, I know that it's different in other countries than it is here. And I just cannot understand why we have the level of poverty and homelessness in America with all of the abundance of resources we have. Why we can't eliminate that. We have, I'm a pet lover. Don't get me wrong, listeners. But we spend more money on resources for pets than we do on human beings.
You see those infomercials about pets in distress. They tear at your heartstrings. But why don't stories of people living in distress because of homelessness and poverty get it? It's the same way.
And so I, lived the American dream. I've always lived in a home, and my parents have been homeowners. And when I was afforded the opportunity to buy my first home, I was elated. I was excited to be able to do that for my children. And, you have to take responsibilities for the choices you make. And I did. And then when I tried to get my house refinanced over 30 times, I could not get refinance. I bought my house with Countrywide. And everybody knows the story with Countrywide, right?
Yeah.
If you don't, go look it up. And when I tried to get my house refinanced, my mortgage was adjusting and it was adjusting and it was adjusting. I had a good mortgage at the time, but it was like 746, and then it kept adjusting, going up. It got all the way up to like 1,600, and I was paying it. and I'm still trying to get it refinanced. And it just got to the point where, after 30 times, my lawyer was like, stop. Then the HOPE program came out with the federal government.
Yeah.
And I was, and every time you went through that program to modify your loan, you had to come up with a down payment. And I kept doing it, and they would lose my paperwork, or they claimed that I didn't turn my paperwork in. And it just got to the point where my attorney was like, stop. You're insolvent. You have, cleaned out every investment account, every retirement account. I work for the state, so the Wisconsin retirement system, I cleaned that out.
You weren't working at McDonald's. You were working for the state.
I was working for the state.
Yeah.
And
nothing wrong with working at McDonald's, but you had the resources.
I had the resources.
Failed you.
Yeah. Well, you're black, and when you go into an institution, you're a single mom, and I can remember being at DOJ and getting that last email after making that payment, and they said they didn't get it. But then I got an email saying, thank you for your payment. And my attorney was sitting in the office.
Yeah.
One of the assistant attorney generals, I just so happened to come in my office, and she said, we're working on a case like this. And I said, but look at this email. And I got the whole program coordinator on the phone. My attorney's sitting in the office. One of the assistant attorney generals is sitting in the office, and she's like, this doesn't make sense. They said they got your payment, but then the people on the phone is saying that they didn't get your payment, but the email came in saying, thank you for your payment.
Yeah, yeah.
And, my attorney said, just stop. You're broke. You can't keep
So
doing
we will
this.
bring you back for maybe a couple of hours. These are topics that, hit home personally, and the causes that Wanda and I care about. Just briefly, what happened in my situation, the county had a mortgage mediation program, and they carefully screened those of us who participated. Of the 160 of us, only 6 kept our homes. Most of us, this process that the county was funding expedited, made it easier for the Wells Fargos of the world to take our homes. And I love Joe Parisi. He's a good friend. He didn't listen to me. I tried to get to the mayor's office to say, maybe this isn't the county. Maybe you're not the county, but maybe you could at least help. People didn't want to listen. They didn't want to hear what was happening. The mortgage situation of 10 to 12 years ago, the notion is, we let a lot of people buy homes who probably shouldn't have.
And so you blame the victim.
You blame the victim, yeah.
And that's why I'm
system.
running. That's why I'm running for mayor, because what I see internally in city government is you hired me to be the equity coordinator to address institutional
issues. Let's back up to that, since we've sort of kind of wandered into the very personal first. Let's establish who you are. So your position right now with the city, with the Department of Civil Rights, is what? And again, I'll let you then explain how that motivates you to make this run for mayor now.
So, my tagline for my mayoral campaign is...
So we just need to establish, so what is your role with the city currently?
So I am the equity coordinator for the city of Madison. My position started off in the mayor's office. Council wanted this position to be in the mayor... council wanted this position not to be in the mayor's office. They wanted it to be neutral. To address the disparities coming out of the Race to Equity report and all of the data, the indicators that was saying Madison was the worst place to live. And the Annie E. Casey report was basically backing that up, and then Justified Anger, had this big, explosion. So it was the perfect storm in the city of Madison, right? And so I was hired to address institutional racism in our policies, our procedures, our structures, and for our communities. Those are the 3 main goals. The first year was interesting because I was looking at everything from a high level with my colleagues, department heads, sitting at the table in the mayor's office. My position was in the mayor's office. My actual physical office was in the Department of Civil Rights. I sat on the mayor's staff, and I did that for about 9 months. At some point, and about a year later, my position, I was not in the mayor's office anymore. My position transferred a year later into the Department of Civil Rights fully. And then I got kicked off the department head meeting. I was uninvited to the department head team. I was no longer welcome. That made it progressively harder for me to do my job and to do what you hired me to do, which was to provide consultation to all of the department heads on institutional racism. My job is to provide consultation. I'm the subject matter expert on all things institutional racism. I do trainings. I educate. I do these things in our policies, our procedures, our budgets for the community, both internal and external. And we have what's called an equitable workforce plan. All of our departments have the goal set.
Okay.
On how we're going to address disparities, both internal and externally. But if I don't sit at the table to do this, and if you don't include me in projects, I was literally excluded out of projects, and they had other people doing my job. And I still ask the question, who is doing my job? And no one answers. Who's doing my job?
So there's a bunch of things we want to parse out of it. I want to be sure to bring Wanda into this because she believes deeply in these issues too. But a couple of just definitional things, because the three of us are geeks on this issue. We get these things. I used to be on the Madison Equal Opportunities Commission, worked on equity issues for over several decades. And as much as it's been important for me to advance LGBT rights, it's always been directly connected to the struggles of people of color, people with disabilities, the other folks that the Department of Civil Rights is charged with. Jim Wright is far and away my biggest hero in this world, who founded the Equal Opportunities Commission. So anyway, and you Wanda, of course, this is just an issue of passion with you. But I think one thing that I've heard you articulate recently, and I think is important for people to understand, is this concept of equity. In many ways, it's moving several layers deeper than where we've been.
Absolutely.
We're called the Madison Equal Opportunities Commission. Now, those are important values, but equity is different than equality. Can you parse that out?
So the difference between equity and equality. Equality means we all get the same thing. And the best analogy that I can explain equality is that you show up to work one day and your supervisor says, you know what? Everybody must wear a pair of steel-toe shoes, and everyone is required to wear a size 9. I don't care if you don't wear a size 9 shoe, but equal means everyone comes in, you wear a size 9. And if you don't wear a size 9, too bad, too sad. Under this operation, you wear a size 9. It's equal. And it doesn't matter if your operation does not, you just have to wear a size 9. It's equal. Everybody gets the exact same thing. That's what equality is. Equality is that we're not looking at what your needs are. We're not looking at the barriers. We're not looking at if it causes detriment to your survival. We're just saying, come in, wear the steel-toe boots, you get a size 9. We're not looking at your gender. We're not looking at your race. We're not looking at your economic status. We're not looking at historical harms or legacies.
It's not a level playing field to begin with.
No.
And so if you say that everybody is treated the same way, you're ignoring the historic inequities that inform what's happening in the here and now.
So that's equality. Now, equity looks at historical legacy. It goes back and it looks at the disparities that has happened historically. It's fair and it's just. Equity says, let's remove barriers. Let's look at the individual. Now I come in, I'm the supervisor in this operation, and I says, hey, what size shoe you wear? What size shoe you wear, John?
It's 11.
What size shoe you wear, Wanda?
8.
Toriana wears a size 10. Now, as a fair and just supervisor, I'm going to say everyone needs a steel-toe boot, and we're all going to get the size that we need in this operation so that it's fair and it's just. And John's a male. I don't know if you identify as a male.
I do.
Right? Wanda's a female. Do you identify as a female, Wanda?
Yes.
Toriana's a female, and I identify as a female. I need to take all of those things into consideration because I don't want to come into this operation and make that assumption. That's equity.
That's equity.
A few years ago, There were equity efforts. There was it was a woman named Sonali
I know Sonali.
Sanjita
Yes,
Bakherjee.
I work with Sonali.
And Sonali does this work in Multnomah County, greater Portland area. And we just had this marvelous conversation. First of all, Sonali was born in what is now Meritor Hospital.
Right.
Her parents, Sri Lankan, were students at the university. It was such a lovely discussion to have because she got all of this stuff. She got that again, that equity means accommodating the bigger picture here. That this is stuff that has a history. That and frankly, one of the biggest challenges is that folks in mainstream culture don't get that history, don't understand it. So you have to be multifaceted and so complicated. That's hard sometimes for people to figure out. But coming back to me asking, how does your current position, impact the fact that you're deciding to run for mayor? I guess, not to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like you were seen as a truth speaker whose truth people didn't want to hear.
Absolutely. I'm hired to do a job. However, when I do my job, I get shut down, and the issues that is in my position description, when I point out the things that you hired me to do and what you say you want, right, in government for the community and our policies, our procedures, and our budgets and our operations, when I point them out and say, here's what the issues are, this is how we can address them, here's how we can implement them both internally and externally, then it becomes about Toriana Pettaway. It becomes about my behavior. It becomes about how I speak. It becomes about my professionalism. It becomes about my passion, right? Oh, you're too passionate. Oh, your behavior. Oh, you offend people. Oh, you might be causing some liabilities. Oh, this is a little too challenging. Oh, and I'm like,
can't empathize with this at all, can you, Wanda?
Excuse me. This is the definition of bait and switch. Yeah. This is the definition of white supremacy culture. And people hate when I say that because then you think I'm calling you a white supremacist.
I'm no racist. What are you doing, Tori?
Wait a minute. Those are two different things.
Right.
That's a distraction. I'm not calling you a white supremacist. Dominant culture has to understand that when you address bias, you have to address it where it's the biggest, in the institutional, systemic, institutional bias. We all carry bias, but you hired me to call it out because that's what I'm good at. I've been doing this for 25 years. You hired me because I beat out the other candidates. There were 23. And you saw something in me that clearly stood out.
Yeah.
But you can't make the issue me. I am not the issue. But when we call these things out, I'm not the issue. And when employees are afraid to use their rights, whether in the APMs, which is a policy, whether in the ordinance, which is a law, through our investigators, or through our ethics or counsel, then it's an issue. So when I got kicked off of the department head team, which I'm supposed to sit at the table, I said, you know what? I can't ask other people to do what I should be doing, so I'm going to run for mayor.
And in doing that, they just basically affirmed everything that you were saying.
Right.
This was in microcosm what happens all over. And I think there are special manifestations in a city of Madison and a Dane County that likes to think, we've already solved these problems.
We're progressive and we're forward.
Let's just kind of, just move on. Every significant problem can be dealt with in a week or so anyway. So, this is something of the past. When I've done interviews with people who are talking about the arc of the 100-year history or Madison in the 60s or whatever, there are inevitably people who say, yeah, racism is a problem and we want to recognize that. And darn it all, I'm going to do everything I can, but not so much here in Madison. Madison's moved past it. I imagine you know differently.
It's very frustrating. I am a navigator. I am going to survive. What grieves my spirit is the frustration of those who are othered, Black and brown employees, and our communities that are struggling.
Yeah.
Right? Both internally and externally.
This tale of two cities we were talking about last hour.
And we're risk adverse and we're complacent. we can address these issues very, I'm not going to say easy, but we can address the things that have been systemic in our community. But we have to get away from complacency. We have to lean into solutions and stop having meetings behind meetings and committees after committees and intellectualizing.
Are you implying that we talk things to death in Madison? I'm
we
just
do.
kidding. We
just
do.
intellectualize things.
Yeah.
We like to have another committee, hire another consultant, and we like to intellectualize because we're an academic community. But the thing is that privilege affords us that, where everyday residents are struggling in crisis. And the people who are sitting at the table can't relate to the issues that the rest of the community are struggling with. But let me tell you something. My grandmother used to say, keep on living. Because what happens is, I love this scenario, and people talk about it all the time. We criminalize crack cocaine. We criminalize those who were suffering with crack addiction, right?
Yeah.
The war on crime in the 80s. And when I say keep on living, we have a heroin epidemic now, and it's plaguing middle, affluent, white families.
Suddenly it's important to get at.
But it's a health crisis now.
Right. It's not something that we're victimizing or blaming the people who were addicted.
Who are affected by it, right?
Because it's in the white mainstream now.
But that's the zero-sum game.
Yeah.
Because when people say racial equity, and we have candidates saying, oh, I do racial equity. My thing is, if you don't understand why racial equity is important and you can't see yourself in the struggle of oppression, that's why. Because when it was affecting Black and brown families and particularly Black men, and you kept saying, well, it's not an issue. Racism, bias is not an issue. Yes, it is. Because when you didn't take care of that issue in the Black and brown family, in that back then, now it's knocking on your door full step. Whenever you see something, right now we have an issue in our teenage population with violence. Part of that reason is because we have an issue with homelessness. We have an issue with housing and employment. And when affluent homeowners or just everyday working class people don't see that as their problem, keep on living. See, you have to look at situations. When crack cocaine was affecting Black and brown people, now it's dead on knocking on affluent families. Because life shows you something. Oppressions are cyclical. It doesn't discriminate. Bias doesn't discriminate. Because see, constructs, which is race, has no ability to see, right?
Absolutely.
It's a construct. It's made up by men.
Right.
And when I say men, people, I'm not trying to be biased here.
There's probably a disproportionate aspect of men. But
right. So I'm a legislator, but I'm also a teacher. I have to build awareness.
Yep.
So when oppressions seep in, you have to recognize that when you have a homeless problem, a housing problem, crisis in our community, you also have an employment problem. And when you ignore that, it's going to come for you too. I don't care if you're a homeowner.
Yep.
Because the public safety then becomes an issue. It's your problem too. So you can't play this zero-sum game. I don't want those people in my neighborhood. What people? Define those people. Black people, brown people, gay people, Chicago people. What people? Say it. Say their name.
Yeah.
Because that's your problem. Because you have to look at other oppressions. Oppressions don't discriminate. They don't have color. Those are constructs.
Yeah.
But we have to stop intellectualizing meeting to meet, and we have to start implementing.
We have to stop shooting the messenger too, which
right.
seems to be very central to what happened to you.
I'm okay with being shot in that respect because I recognize that is how the game is played. It's easier to attack the person who's bringing, you know what? This is the issue.
You can't empathize with that, can you, Wanda?
This is the issue, and this is how we address it, and here's the solution. Because we're risk adverse and we're complacent. And we don't want to tell affluent people or people who collect checks on both sides of the table, we got to do something different. And this is how we do it. Because what happens is, I'm going to talk about transportation now.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop you just a second. Got to reset the show. We're actually halfway through it, believe it or not. We have plunged into the deep end. We will get to transportation and some of the other specifics in a moment. But just for folks who are joining in midstream here again, we have Toriana Pettaway here. She is a candidate for mayor of Madison. I'm sorry, your current job position is the city
equity coordinator.
Equity coordinator out of the Department of Civil Rights for the city of Madison. She's been explaining kind of what launched her on this path. And we're going to expand on those issues, give Wanda a chance to weigh in, and all of that. But again, you have an opportunity. If you'd like to participate in this conversation, give us a call at 608-825-0930. Over these next 2 mornings, we've spoken now with Mo Cheeks, now with Toriana. Tomorrow, speaking with Rod Shukla and Satya Rhodes Conway. An invitation has been issued to our mayor. We hope he will take us up on that opportunity the following week. But we want to use this opportunity to have this wider discussion in the course of a full hour to learn where each of these folks are coming from, what motivates them to become mayor, what they would do if elected as mayor of the city of Madison. 608-825-0930 is that number. Wanda, you and Tori were on Wart on a show that had a format where several different topics were being discussed. You had like about 5 minutes at the end to try to squeeze in your concerns.
We was like, it's okay. Yeah.
Okay.
So we wanted to have you have a chance to finish that. But what are you thinking of the discussion so far? What questions do you have of Tori?
Right, yeah. I could definitely relate to her story when she talks about some of the challenges that she's faced as being a black professional. I've definitely experienced that. Oh, I'm too outspoken, or I hate white people, and just, you're too angry. I become the angry black person when we start bringing up like real issues that need change, right? Or begin to start silencing you and stop inviting you to meetings, or basically probably give you a pink slip and say, we'll see you later.
I had my first 1-day suspension on Friday. Oh. All of a sudden, since I've announced my candidacy for mayor, I've been insubordinate.
Public enemy number 1. Right?
I've been insubordinate, and I've had hearings. I've had by my supervisor, and it's ironic that these things have now started to happen.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, I fully suspected that would happen.
Yeah.
And it is unfortunate that this would happen. My colleagues and my employees do come to me all the time and bring issues, but I had to draw a line in the sand, and I kept saying, I tell people now, because I am a target, and when employees come to me, I say, I am a target now, and all I can do is give you resources and strategy, which I've always been doing, on how to protect yourself. I take stuff back to management, but every time I take stuff to management, they attack me.
And Wanda, we've got a half an hour, so we have a chance to expand. But I guess I want to zero in on this. I mean, you're giving a whole new level of what happened this past Friday.
Right.
But you making this decision is very specific to our incumbent mayor and the way things played out in the mayor's office, that you were initially someone who had a seat at the table. You were pushed away from the table. Now you're being declared as being insubordinate for speaking out on these issues that you were hired to bring forward.
Right.
How much of your decision is specific concerns about the way that Paul Soglin has been leading the city? How much of your desire here, in the broader sense, is to say it's time for a change?
It is beyond time for a change. Our community deserves so much better and more. 20 plus years of leadership, with our leadership not being engaged in the community. We need engagement and new innovation in the community. We need informed collaboration in the community. I'm in the community. I'm on the ground. I can take the attacks, right? Because I'm brown. I'm a black woman, and those are things that you deal with trauma every day, regardless. This is just a new leader. This is just a new level of trauma. So
I guess what I want to zero in on, just so that we're very specific about this, are you holding Mayor Paul Soglin responsible for the circumstances that you're talking about here?
I don't know if he's directly involved. I can't.
Because there are other managers involved here, other
There's a
decision
manager
makers.
in between me and Paul now.
Okay.
And so I can't say if he's directly involved, but what I can say is these issues did not come up until I announced my candidacy in September. All of a sudden, I'm insubordinate.
Part of this is you did not have a chance to broach this with Mo Cheeks earlier, but Mo Cheeks was the second in command in the Common Council. I'm trying to remember what that is. It's not the president.
Vice president.
Vice president. Essentially, almost every other circumstance in the last several decades, the person who is the vice chair, we may be missing the name of that role exactly, becomes the chair.
Right.
But in this case, I think it was made pretty explicit that Mayor Soglin felt threatened by Mo, and therefore Mike Verveer became chair instead. But there's a parallel here. One of the concerns when Paul re-announced after unannouncing that he was coming in is that I'm going to support him because I'm afraid of him. I'm afraid he's going to retaliate. I'm afraid he's going to feel threatened by this threat to my power. I'm sorry. I love this man dearly. He is one of my heroes. But I was put on an enemies list when I tried to speak out about homelessness when I was in the MAOC.
Right.
One of his aides told me I couldn't come to meetings that were public meetings.
Right.
There's something going on here that is not cool.
There's absolutely something going on here. I found it very strange when he said the only candidate that he felt that was qualified was Satya, when he announced that he was not going to run for mayor.
Oh, and she feels real good about his turnabout. But
and then he gets back in the race because then I jumped in.
Yeah.
Right after that press release, I announced my candidacy after that. And then he jumps back in, which I fully knew he was going to run all along. I knew that because, I'm an insider. It wasn't a surprise at all. I'm an insider. And then to say ambition is not enough to qualify you to run for mayor, and that was a direct hit to Mo.
Yeah.
And I had made a comment at the Wisconsin Leadership Conference, and I said, that came across a little racist to me.
Well, just the only unprecedented challenge to someone succeeding to be the vice chair, to be the president of the Common Council, was inflicted. It was targeted against a man of color, and there was just no awareness of that.
Right.
I'm sorry. If there were extenuating circumstances, maybe they needed to be brought out. But this city just is so screwed up on stuff like that.
It's easy to say that we don't have a racist problem in this city when you are a white man and you operate with privilege. And then to say we have a racism problem. But when surveys go out and we keep disputing the race to equity information because of ACA's data, do you know how hard I fought our leadership regarding that information? I said, I don't care if the ACS data is Dane County and it's 1 year. Go out in the community. I challenged our leadership. I was the only one doing that.
Right.
Just go in the communities and see what's going on with our residents. Period. Stop looking at data.
Yeah.
That is a dominant construct. Just go and see how families are doing and individuals are doing.
Tori, the thing that frustrates me, I don't mean to cut you off, but the thing that frustrates me about all of this is that it's some kind of shiny, bright new toy that some of the leaders in our community discovered. There's a head of a major foundation who said, well, 5 years ago, I guess no one would have guessed that there was a problem like this. Where were you living that no one could have guessed this was a problem? This goes back decades. Again, endless studies, endless discussions, endless data sets. I'm sorry, all you got to do is do exactly what you're talking about. Talk to the people and figure out what their realities are.
But the Urban League did the disparity study
5
years before that, and you didn't look at that.
So it's just, so your appointment was a very powerful thing, but it should have been done years ago.
Right.
I mean, the notion that this is somehow new to our community or that it's the function of recent economic, I don't know what their construct is. Again, we're not picking on all white rich guys.
We're not, because we are all Madison, which is my tagline, means all residents. I want to lead with innovation and innovative solutions for all residents.
And this is going to help
This is the state.
everybody. It's going to lift all
Right.
ships.
Absolutely, because we have a wonderful community. We have always been forward and progressive, but just not for everyone.
And again, it's not ahistorical. It doesn't come out of this
No.
moment. It's something that's been around for a long time.
But Wanda, you
Yeah.
go ahead, Wanda.
So, I think what's missing in our whole government is equity. And you said that so well. Even like with our housing crisis, let's just get some equity in there, right? Because we're operating without it.
Right.
When we have 1,000 people on the homeless waiting list, when we increase our police budget by $3 million, I got a problem with that because that's scary for me, because what I feel like we're going to see a lot of black dead bodies on the street if we keep putting these police on the street, police in these schools. So we have to look at a more of a preventive plan, right, to help with this violence. And you talked about the teens, right?
Right.
And a lot
Right.
of the violence is coming from where? The homelessness. You're putting people out on the street. That's where the violence is growing, because people don't have a place to live.
Right, right. One of my solutions to deal with families, and one of the things that I would definitely do right away with what a mayor actually have control with. I listened to some of the solutions that are coming from the other candidate, and those are collaborations that you don't have a lot of control over, because collaborators,
So when you say the other candidate, you're talking about
Mo.
Okay,
right.
Thank you.
Because, collaborators could do whatever they want.
Okay.
But what a mayor has span of control over. One of the things that I would do right away is we don't have performance evaluations for department heads. They don't have that currently in contracts, meaning that in the private sector, you have standards, you have performance, and that I would implement right away. Training, we don't have a training system that we do professional development. So how I would address this that would have a direct impact with our community is every department head would have performance standards, professional development tied to our equitable workforce plan. The way that this would connect to our community is that I would make it a regular standing thing that leadership would encourage, and make it a standing collaboration that every employee will have the opportunity to have anywhere from 10 to 20 hours a month to volunteer at schools, nonprofits in the community. This way, we can actively work with the county, the Madison Metropolitan School Districts. I believe that individuals, family, we need to be community in the community, can actually be in the schools. I'm not for police officers in schools, and let me tell you why. I believe 99% of our police officers are wonderful people. We do have bias issues, though, because we all operate with bias. I don't want police officers in school, because when children and families have to go to prisons or jail, that's not normal.
Yeah.
Prisons are a business. They're a business. That's just the next generation of slavery.
Right. Yeah.
I'm sorry. It really is. I don't want people who don't have that experience or don't have to go to prisons to see their family members to have that be a norm in the schools.
Kids of color are disproportionately likely to be targeted
Right.
by the police in those schools,
Right.
too.
So I don't want to integrate that trauma
Right.
into schools.
Yeah.
What I want to integrate is individuals having 10 to 20 hours of volunteerism service, maybe in a month, maybe 10 hours. That's something a mayor can directly control, is that if we can offer volunteerism in the schools, like Read Your Heart Out is coming up. That's a once time a year type of thing. But what if the mayor, through ordinance, through APM, said, you know what? Through your position description, through your professional development, you're able to volunteer in a nonprofit, hopefully in collaboration with Dr. Cheatham and the Madison School District. We integrate that type of service-oriented volunteerism in the school district so families have more time to spend with their kids. That is helping.
Do you believe there's a disconnect? I think, I look at other cities, and whether it's for housing issues or some of these basic economic justice issues, fully utilizing the power of our youth, I think other cities have done a better job about connecting the dots between the school system and the city, meaning there's potential here to do a lot more, right?
There is definitely a disconnect. We can be doing more. I don't think that we allocate funding dollars in the way that we need. Our young people actually need to sit at the table and tell us what they need. We have children in our community who are disconnected because no one is actually talking to them and saying, what is it that you need? Families need to be engaged and say, we know that you're overworked. And when I talk about a living wage, not $15 an hour, I keep saying that that is a wage maybe for a teenager. $20 to $22 an hour is a livable wage because we haven't had a COLA, cost of living increase.
That gets missed about all this glorification of a $15
It's
an
not.
hour. It's not adequate.
It's not adequate. And the reason why it's not adequate, because when we talk about housing affordability, rent in this community is ridiculous. So we need to start addressing, our TID districts and our TIFs and contracting for equity. I'm going to talk about, and really in my leadership in the first 100 days, how do I say, hey, I want to push employment and housing in a way that's meaningful to parents. So right now we know it's two and a half jobs.
Right.
If I can get it down to 1.5 jobs so that housing disparities is not a thing in this community. And you have to work collaboratively with school districts and say, what are the barriers for these families? You have to do holistic wraparound care with families on an individual planning basis. Just like the kids that are in these schools that are not going to school, you have to do individual plan of care for these kids. You have to ask them, what is it that you need? What is your disconnect? We can't do kind of like cookie cutter planning. You can't create a model and say, this is going to work for everyone.
So, Tori, you're essentially answering this question. We got about 15 minutes left. I want to be very strategic about how we use this. But I think some of the question is, Tori is currently in the position of equity coordinator for the city. Those issues are really central. But then it's the extension of part of what I was asking Mo. What about those experiences or your overall background would make you a good manager of the city? Because that's a good part of it. So we'll get into that in a second. One of the fundamental issues, of course, that you're facing now is that you are a write-in candidate. Could you explain to people how you wandered down that path and what happened? What does it mean?
So I am a write-in candidate, meaning that on February 19th, for me to be the one of two to get to the April 2nd election day, you must write my name on the ballot to be on the ballot for the April 2nd election. How I got there, I had more than 200 nomination signatures. When I showed up the first time, the week before the nomination signatures were due, I showed up with 124 signatures. I showed up at the clerk's office on a Friday. My two children, Toriana and Ashton, my son recorded it because he was so excited. When we were sitting in the car, everything in me said take pictures, but I did not photocopy my nomination pages. But my son was like, can I record you? Because he kept saying, you don't post anything on Instagram, your Instagram page.
I'm going to interrupt you just a little bit because obviously this is such a complicated and nuanced story, but we got
to go faster. Right.
Let me cut to a couple punches. So you essentially, one of the tricks that we talked about earlier is people don't often realize whether they live in the city or the town.
Right.
So that was one of the problems, that you had some signatures that were the town, not the city.
Right.
In general, the conventional wisdom is, I think, among people who have run for mayor before, and this is your first time, is you gather like 300 signatures just to make sure that there's no other things. You learned as you went along. Unfortunately, what you ended up with was out of the 200 signatures you needed, you only had 199, and that was enough to put you in this position. I
actually turned in more than 200.
Right.
They disvalidated quite a bit of my signatures. There were a lot of inconsistencies. The first time the clerk's office got back to me, they said, you only have 198, and it was about 5:25 in the afternoon. When I first turned them in, the issue was there was inconsistencies, and so they said I can turn in an affidavit to contest the 198. I had asked the day that they were due to have my signatures validated twice. Nick Hart was in the office with me, and he heard me. He was the other
Nick
candidate.
Hart is the one candidate we haven't run in. He actually lives in the town. We
Right.
may talk to him eventually, but I didn't put him on the list because of that. But yes, go ahead.
But the kick is that Nick was having his validated. They told me no
Yeah.
twice.
Okay.
And I left, came back. Well, I left and came back the next day. The wonderful thing is that we did an affidavit. Nick had his validated. He had enough time to go get 12 additional signatures.
Okay.
They would not validate my signatures in my presence like I asked them to.
Okay.
I get an email at 5:25 saying, sorry, you have 198. I turned in over 200 signatures.
Sure.
And it was just inconsistent. The state administrative code says may validate.
Okay.
May verify is what I'm saying.
So just quickly, is this under appeal or anything? I mean, right now the status quo is that you have 199, one short
Right.
of the necessary. You're a write-in candidate. Is there any way that would change?
No, because I'm not taking it to court.
Okay.
I can't. I cannot afford to fight for 190.
Given the barrier
signature.
that is there, that you're a write-in candidate, that your name isn't on the ballot, do you
Right.
believe that you still have a chance to become mayor of Madison?
I do, and because I had this is a divine run, and when I say that, I'm a woman of faith. This is a divine one.
No, I would just point out that Scott Walker explained that God decided he should be governor, and people had some problems with that. So you may want to parse that out a little bit, even though
you
you're
know-
among a pastor's kid and a pastor. We understand what you're talking about, but
Hey, take that.
this is the path you're on. You were supposed to be on, I think.
Right. This is the path I'm supposed to be on because I am running for the least of these. And if you don't understand what that is, it's okay. But I'm running. My tagline, like I said, is weareallmadison.com.
Do you know who Shirley Chisholm was?
Yes.
So I had the honor 10 years or so ago to interview the woman named Shala Lynch, an African-American 27-year-old who did her documentary. It cut to the punch. Shirley maybe knew at the time that she wasn't going to be president in 1972, but her campaign had meaning. She brought in young people. She brought in people like Barbara Lee, who had never been politically active, who's still active in our scene. She mobilized and energized ideas and people, got people involved. I don't know which of the six of you is going to make it through the election, but for any of you who don't, there's still something really powerful in doing what you're doing.
Right.
Isn't that right?
Absolutely. And to plant a seed and to bring hope and to inspire and to bring light to what's in the dark. There are things that are not happening right in our city, and I have to be the voice of that. People can't run, cannot run and say that they're leading with race and they want to address racial equity and they don't know what they're talking about.
The other aspect of this candidacy is so exciting for me as someone who's been a proponent for getting people into office who reflect the full diversity of our community, is that we have you, we have Mo, we have Raj, we have an open lesbian candidate in
Right.
Satya. Again, Paul, also, for better or for worse, I mean, what we're concerned about in the here and now has a long record of
Right.
being concerned about these issues. How cool is that? And how
Right.
cool that you can sit here and critique our candidate of the last hour, that as two people of color, you can still have differences. You can
Right.
you can agree to disagree. You have points of commonality, but we're not a very sophisticated community of understanding that. We've been very tokenistic sometimes about advancing a
Absolutely.
single person, anointing a single person to speak for an entire community.
Right.
How exciting is it that we're moving past that now?
I want to be Madison's first Black female who has over 20 years of government experience teaching managers, department heads, administrators of state agencies, working with unions on both sides. I have the experience to do this.
So let's get very specific because we got about 8 minutes left. You had started to lead us into a conversation about transportation.
Oh,
so as a
yeah.
case in point, your position right now, you're identified as somebody who is an advocate for equity. But how does the skill set that you have allow you to embrace issues like transportation that are essential to the
Right.
city?
Like I said, all of the department heads have to work with me. But one of the things that I am very aware of is that The transportation in my issue, in my understanding right now, I know that our transit department had a budget deficit. People don't know that. And so when the other candidates, the mayor does, when the other candidates talk about solutions, they don't know what they're talking about. I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But what I can say as far as a solution is concerned is rerouting buses right now based off of disparities and where there are lack of access and service.
Let me just mention one thing specifically. So Raj Shukla has advocated that we actually have a free transportation system. Is that something you'd advocate for?
Well, not when you have a budget deficit. So
Okay.
that would have to be done long term to sustain that. There are equity regulations that come into place with the federal government. See, he doesn't know what he's talking about. So those things would have to be done over a long-term period. You can't just you just can't say, oh, in the first 100 days or in the first year, we're going to do that. That's something that you would have to parcel out and work over time.
So what I want to bring off that, I apologize if I'm interrupting. We just want to make sure we get a full picture here in these last few minutes.
Right.
What I'm hearing you say, whether it be Mo or Raj or perhaps Satya, who we haven't talked about,
Right.
or Paul Soglin's maybe in a different category. He does have experience. He does understand these systems to a certain extent. You're saying that because you have worked within the city government system, you see these things in very practical ways. You draw
Right.
on experience that would be relevant to you being mayor. Is that right?
Right. Absolutely.
And could you compare and contrast just a little briefly the three other challengers and how your skill set
Right.
contrasts with theirs?
So mass rapid transit can happen in our community, but I really want to finish what I was saying.
Yeah, please do. Sorry.
I would reroute buses in this community based off of disparity. Some of our residents have 2 to 3 transfers. It takes them 2 to 3 hours
It's
to
a
get
convoluted system.
in our community.
Yeah.
Some of our residents have transit times that are less than 10, 15 minutes. They go east to west. That east to west corridor had the most access. They're not transit dependent. They oftentimes have free bus passes. You have to put buses where people have the greatest needs. These are the residents who are homeless. These are the residents that are catching cabs because the buses aren't frequent enough for them. And these are also the residents who are also second and sometimes working third shifts. So if you do a racial impact analysis, it will actually pan itself out and say, this is where the greatest needs are. These are the residents that are in the outlying area where we have our neighborhood resource teams are the areas that have the greatest need. We need to redistribute buses where the greatest needs are. Not to say you take it away from the residents that have the greatest access, but it's called removing barriers.
Something I forgot to ask Mo about that my housemate really wanted me to mention. He supports Uber. There's a controversy in a town in which the cab companies are regulated, have to serve all of our neighborhoods, are under obligations to be fair and equitable in their delivery services. Uber and Lyft, no, not so much. So how do you feel about that?
But the thing with Uber and Lyft is that there's a cultural discrepancy because I don't want to make an assumption, but the majority of these residents may not have debit cards, credit cards. Sometimes they heavily utilize, I don't want to, online banking cards. They don't use banking systems. They use like payday loan type systems to cash their checks. So those are barriers we have to address. So we have financial literacy. How do we get them out of that poverty mentality? So I would say yes, because I know that these residents are catching
so you
cabs.
say yes to what?
Yes, that is an option because they're already catching cabs.
Okay.
Uber and Lyft is cheaper than catching cabs. So I don't
right.
want to talk against cab drivers because I know that that's something that they're already doing.
Okay.
But they're not using electronic means to pay for their services is what I'm saying.
So anyway, much more
So
complicated.
that's a barrier.
Yeah.
That's a barrier.
We're down to 4 minutes. So I just want to give, actually, Wanda, do you have other things you wanted to inject into the conversation or ask her about?
Well, I'm glad that Tori got a chance to talk, which is good
Right.
because I think like the last time we were together, I felt like you didn't really get out what you needed to get out.
Right.
So it's okay that I'm just listening to so that you can get things out.
We're going to have her back, too.
Yes, we're gonna have you back too. But I do have a question for the new mayor. That's gonna be for whoever that may be, right? Our new mayor. So my biggest question is, so what is the comprehensive plan for helping with this violence that's taking place in our community?
You know, I heard the other candidate talk about peer support, and the one thing that I want to say, when you talk about something and you talk about council, I want to encourage voters to go see how people voted on something. You can't say you did something, but you didn't vote for it.
Okay, he didn't.
The mayor called him out on that at a forum.
Mo Cheeks didn't.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
So I have to put that out there.
Sure.
You can show up at meetings, you can stand with people, but you got to vote for it.
So I'm sorry, we just got a couple of minutes left, but you've differentiated yourself from Mo. Could you also explain maybe your concerns
So
about?
as far as peer support is concerned and violence in our community, I'm fully in agreement with, the peer support program. I didn't directly have anything
Sure.
to do with that. But one of the things that I would say is that program, is wonderful the way that they're going to address it. It has to be more comprehensive than that. It has to be multiple things beyond that.
What I want to give you the opportunity is just contrast yourself, if you could, with both Raj and Satya and your
Right.
qualifications.
What I would personally do as mayor is we have to create spaces for young people. And what I would do is bring young people to the table and directly ask them what do they want for themselves. We don't have spaces for them. We don't have services, and I don't want to create more programs. I want to create what they want. So I need to create a comprehensive plan designed by them. That's what I would do.
Okay. So let me just, so I can frame this, because I just do want to give you the opportunity. So Raj comes from a background as a nonprofit manager. You come from a background working within the city. Could you contrast that? Satya comes from the perspective of an academic who's worked at the university, who's also been an alder. Why do you feel that your set of circumstances in both of those cases would make you a better mayor?
I've worked for the Madison College as an educator since '07. I've worked for what is now the Road Home, and I was a homeless coordinator when it was IHN for 7 years. I've worked with Nehemiah and Fountain of Life, done ministry work for over 20 years with 7 ministries. The homeless ministry, women's ministry, fun and fellowship ministry, children's ministry. But let me tell you, I have been in the community doing work the whole time that I've been in Madison.
Which is how long?
26 years.
Okay.
And I teach. I'm a teacher. My background is human resources. So I've been on the ground doing the work. So equity is not something that I just started doing. Affirmative action is not something I just started doing. Equal opportunities is not something I just started doing. I have been on the Equal Opportunities Commissions, the Affirmative Actions Commissions with the city. I've done all of this work. And, so to start talking about something just because I just started being the equity coordinator 3.5 years ago. No, I've been doing this work.
This is much more than that.
It's been much longer than this. Fair Housing of Greater Madison. I've been with Fair Housing for 12 years as an advisory to the board.
So we can stretch maybe just a couple more minutes, but again, I'm sorry to keep coming back to this, but you've contrasted yourself pretty effectively with Paul, with Mo. What about Satya and Raj? What do you have that they don't have? What are obviously you're not running a negative campaign, but these are important things for people to understand.
Well, so to kind of blow them out the water, I also do this work nationally. So people call me from all over the nation to train on racial equity and social justice. And as I've been doing this work in the city of Madison, I get phone calls from all over the nation leading this work. Now, Sadia says she does that, but if you look at my bio, I've been doing this with multiple municipalities. I'm helping other municipalities set up their equity work across the nation as a forerunner. And so, these are things that you can fact check. These are things that you can fact check. Because I lead a team of 40 plus folks here, a core team with training, data, community connections, and communications, I'm seen as a foremost expert, and I'm leading other municipalities with helping them understand what racial equity and social justice look like from an environmental point of view.
So I apologize. We're just kind of stretching time here, but it's just like Wart. Eventually the hour ends.
I know.
So you've contrasted yourself now with Satya and again the other two candidates. What about Raj?
Well, Raj, his platform is on environmental justice. And so when I talk about social justice, one of the things that I'm currently working on right now is trying to make sure that all of our departments really implement Title VI. Title VI look at environmental justice. Right now, we're not kind of in compliance to a degree. Title VI looks at air quality, water, and the land, and making sure that
urban environmentalism.
Urban, environmental justice, because what that does is that it impacts low income and people of color. And when we want to make sure that is first, because when something happens in your community, when you're building or contracting, and I want to lead with contracting for equity, the first people that are impacted are low income and people of color.
So we got to get off the air. 30 seconds, if you could. Just what is the reason why people should come in, write in your name? Actually, are you still be on the ballot even if you don't make it through the February primary? Because you still be a write-in candidate.
If I'm one of two, February 19th, I will
you
be on the ballot. Yes, because that means I beat out the other candidate. So I will be on the ballot if I make it through February 19th.
But you could continue to be a write-in candidate even if you weren't one of the final two, I believe. Right?
No, being a write-in won't matter if you
don't do. So February 19th is do or die. Okay.
Yes. So
30
write
seconds.
my name on the ballot February 19th. You can find me at weareallmadison.com or Toriana Pettaway for mayor. I am the candidate that you want to take a chance with. I am not complacent. I am not risk adverse, and I am the only one qualified. Mayor Soglin has had his time. You need innovative leadership. I need to be the first Black mayor in Madison, because let me tell you something. If you're talking about racial equity, no one else can lead the city but me.
Toriana Pettaway, thank you so much for joining us. Again, this is part of this ongoing series, discussion with the four challengers and perhaps the incumbent down the road here tomorrow. It's beginning at 7 a.m. We'll be talking with Raj Shukla. Then at 8 a.m. with Satya Rhodes Conway, Wanda Smith. Hey, thanks as always. Pretty interesting conversations we're having here.
Awesome. I'm excited.
And the great thing is we have community conversation
That's
partners who are going
right.
to come back and join us again.
For sure.
Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us.
Thank
Great.
you.
And again, we thank
Great
everybody at
questions.
the Sun Prairie Media Center for their support in getting these words out. This is John Quinlan. We hope you all have a good week, hopefully with warmer weather and other exciting things. Please do join us again in a special edition sometime beginning at 7 a.m. tomorrow.